whatever we're dealing with, it's to the point now where even when we do investigations, it will almost control the environment. And let me say it like this. The field of ufology, the even occult, the field of the occult and even demonology, they all want us to believe that a primordial man extinguished his campfire, decided to repair himself to his personal quarters, took pen to paper or something, whatever, to papyri, whatever, and began to string letters together into words. And if those words are uttered phonetically correct, an intelligence beyond the ether would inhabit the vowels. And then in inhabiting the vowels, the incantation would produce the incarnation of the entity. I'm supposed to believe that we conjured them? No, I don't. I believe they conjured us. And the model of ufology is leaning on such, it's so secular to the point where, okay, yes, Jacques Vallée, well, yeah, well, they seeded us with technology. Okay, that's fine, but that's the modern incarnation. What if they seeded us with the incantation first? And we fed into the belief that we were the conjurers, not realizing we were the ones being conjured. And more than that, this gets back to the shortest horror story ever told. The last man on earth heard a knock at the door. Who is it? And so this is why I believe that if we really want to know disclosure, and I know I'm just shooting from the hip now, but I believe 100% disclosure happened in antiquity. And this is why people like Tim Taylor, he's out in the middle of the New Mexico desert. What is he doing? He's building altars. That changes the model.
Hey guys, I'm back here again tonight with Nathaniel Gillis, and it's always a great pleasure to speak to Nathaniel. He's a very interesting guy to speak to, and he's always got some great insights, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of them with him tonight. So, Nathaniel, how are you? Welcome back.
Doing,
Great to see
doing
you.
good, sir. It's great to be back with you. As I told you before, it's always a stellar time, and I always enjoy myself, which is why I'm back. So I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. What have you been doing? What have you been researching?
Well, I'm preparing to lecture at the Awakening Expo in Manchester this coming February. I'll be with Steve Mera, Barry Fitzgerald, Paul St. Clair, Mark Oley, and the Kinsella brothers, and we're going to be covering the dark side of ufology, which, if anybody even has a cursory knowledge of my research, that's pretty much what it's turned into as of late. Understanding the nuances of this phenomenon and how it's not all love and light, and even much worse, it's not all lovers and light either. So that's what I've been doing, and I think I'm going to be the last speaker at the conference. And as the date gets closer to us, I'll be sharing more about the subject matter I'll be talking about there. So that's what I've been doing, and there are certain insights that I've been able to gain, and we'll be discussing that here today.
Where is that? In Manchester, did you say?
Yes, sir, Manchester, in February the 17th, I believe. Yep.
Well, I saw now the flyer that you had for that. That it seems like a
Yeah.
big event, is it?
It's like the little brother of the major event that goes on later in the year. So I don't know if I'll be going to that. I hope so. It'd be wonderful. But I know for sure that I'll be lecturing at the smaller expo this February.
When you say the dark side of ufology, what do you mean by that?
Mhm.
What can you explain maybe one aspect of that?
Oh, absolutely. Whatever we're dealing with is an intelligence that likes to manage our perception of it. 100%. I mean, we've seen that not just in abduction literature, but incubi literature as well, where when the phenomenon manifests, it does certain things to the experiencer, and quite literally, like a serial killer, will cover its own tracks and implant screen memories into the consciousness of that individual to where when they look back at what happened to them, they're really not sure if that's exactly what occurred to them or if it was just some nightmare. And that's what I believe that's one of the darker nuances, I should say, of this phenomenon is, if it was all love and light, why would it want us to forget? And why is it that each and every time we try to remember, it's almost as if the actual occurrence, the methodologies they were employing, the ritualistic nature of them, it doesn't correlate with the trauma they're creating, right? The memory says, okay, yeah, it was all love and light and everything's fine. And yet the body itself is suffering from some kind of traumatic event. And there is this sort of cognitive dissonance between what is remembered mentally and what the body suffered in the encounter. So the phenomenon likes to manage our perception of it, and to such an alarming degree that there is some sort of cognitive dissonance between what experiencers remember occurred to them in their abduction and what the body remembers itself. And so what we have here essentially is a control mechanism employed by whatever intelligence this is to where it covers its own tracks, which is mind-blowing to me. And this is another indicator that whatever we're dealing with is not all love and light, because there's a difference. And so what we're seeing now in the field are experiencers, like I said, okay, the mind has a screen memory implanted by the phenomenon, but the body is suggesting that something more malevolent occurred. In other words, if it was just something very easy, they took a couple samples and sent me on my way, why is it that I'm suffering from PTSD symptoms, where I'm having flashbacks, where the body itself is pushing itself through the screen memory, the phenomenon implanted? And we've seen this over and over again. And one of the unusual case studies, I should say, about this is Dr. Carla Turner herself, and not just an individual she worked with. But there was a point in time when her son came to her and said, "Mother, I don't want to alarm you, but whoever's been taking you is also now taking me." He started having abduction experiences. And so when Dr. Turner realized that, she called the entire family together. And so this son of hers was from a previous marriage. So she called her ex-husband, who was already remarried, and said, "Listen, we need to get together, have dinner, and there's something that our son wants to explain to you. And I feel that we need, number one, we need to hear him out, and more than anything, we need to be there for him." So it was. They got together as a family, and her son is telling his story. These things are happening to me. I don't understand it, but I know it's real. And it was in that meeting that evening that Dr. Carla Turner's ex-husband just, flip it. Like everybody knew this. That's what he really thought. But he said, "Carla," he said, "Dude, don't you remember that when you were experiencing these same abductions that you had a miscarriage? They inseminated you with a fetus and you had a miscarriage." And she did not remember it, my friend. Like, I'm not talking about like, oh my God, I spaced out for a fleeting moment. No, it was not temporary amnesia. It was like she had no conscious awareness that ever took place. Her body suffered from it. She lost a profound amount of blood to the point where her ex-husband was like, yeah, he's like, I had to even take all the comforter and the covers and the pillows. Instead of washing them, I just took them out, threw them away. And he's like, "So don't you remember this?" And so she's like freaking out because she's like, okay, I had no memory about that. That never happened to me. And so what the phenomenon did was literally, if the pregnancy failed, it completely wiped that memory out of her mind. And she's living her life not realizing that there are things happening to her and that there are things that have happened to her. She does not have the cognitive ability to remember.
Did she ever remember? Did she ever recall
She
that
remembered it. Yes, yes. She did
miscarriage?
some memory regression, and it came to the forefront. But what this demonstrates is a profound amount of control over us. It's almost like a serial killer. If you would have given a serial killer the kind of power that what he wants to have to do something to the victim, get whatever he needs from that experience and from that interaction, and then later on, if that individual could say, "You know what, that serial killer, I'm going to control your perception of that entire event, and even if you do remember some of the nuances of what occurred, a lot of that is going to come from me and what I want you to remember." And so Jacques Vallée considers this again to be some form of control mechanism where we're put in this, and this is some of Dr. Carla Turner's work, this virtual reality scenario, wherein the experiencer is making decision based upon falsified facts. And it's incredible. I mean, literally, it's not consent because consent cannot occur if the facts or the manifestation or even if the cognitive interface, if all of that is a lie, then the experiencer is basing their decisions on a false reality. Is this making sense?
When you say a false, yes, it is. When you're saying
Mhm.
a false reality and they're making
Mhm.
decisions based on this false reality, can you
Mhm.
give me an example of what would a
Absolutely.
typical false reality be?
So there are two arguments within this spectrum of understanding. Is number one, they are either taking consciousness out and manipulating it and then put it back in, which is one of Dr. Carla Turner's points in her research, or it's literally coming through our mind and reinterpreting what we're seeing. Does it make sense? It's not just a physical mask outside. It's literally coming through us and reinterpreting what we're witnessing. Very unique. It goes back to, okay, are these beings coming to us or are they coming through us? It's very, very unique. But for instance, years and years, well, not years ago, about 2 years ago now, I guess it's just, yeah, so it's years. I was talking to an experiencer who was going to bed at nighttime, and she said that when she got into bed, she felt this slumber just descend down upon her. And she said that at that point in time, her husband walked into the room, walked over to her, and she says she just felt this profound lust in a sense, right? We've seen this over and over again, and they have a physical encounter. And during this encounter, she's making all of her decisions based upon the world or the worldview and the reality she's perceiving. The phenomenon quite literally manifested first to the senses she utilized the most to interpret her world. And so this is powerful too, because when I get to the next point, you're gonna be like, okay, this is making more sense. But so essentially what occurred was the being induces her into this mating ritual that's accompanied by a debilitating slumber. So already her perception is skewed. Is this a dream or is this reality? Is it a nightmare? What's really going on? And then after they copulated, she said her husband gets off of the bed and he just stands there staring at her. And that's when she's looking at his facial features, and there were little portions of little spots. She said it did not, it looked like my husband, let me say this, if you got it off of Wish, right? Like a Dollar General version, right? It wasn't like my husband, there were portions of it that did not align with the husband I've known for these many years. She said that's when she started to come to becoming more conscious. And then she thought, oh my God, my husband, my real husband, has been next to me asleep the entire time. And not only that, she said, but I knew he was asleep. So, what is this? That's when the entity contorted itself to what it really looked like, faded into a shadowy smoke, and then floated out through the hallway. So, in some of these cases, well, a lot of them, if not all, you can't consider the experiencer giving them consent, truthfully, because what she's consenting to is a lie. And yet the phenomenon places these individuals in this sociological paradigm where, okay, I'll manifest as someone you know, you believe in, you love, and I will literally step into a memory. Like, okay, what do you remember your husband to be? Okay, boom. And in that fleeting moment, the experiencer is basing all of their decisions on a world, a reality, a mask that is fictitious. It's a replica of what her husband really was. And so this again, this speaks to the nature of the manipulation aspect. What are we really dealing with here? And after spending copious amounts of hours reading these case studies over and over again, where this program essentially employs this technique, I have to ask myself what's really going on. It's not just, okay, I'm employing a mask. Something much darker and much deeper is going on, to the point where the phenomenon will measure your belief in the mask it's wearing. And according to whether or not you believe in it, that is how it will tailor itself.
So is there, well, let me ask you this. How many abductions are going on? Do you know? Like when these sort of abductions, how many do you think are going on? Like what? Well, actually, let me ask you this in a different way. How many of these negative experiences go on in these abductions? Because who knows how many abductions go on really? Do you know what the
Correct.
percentage is? Was there any?
I don't know the correct percentage, and even if we had a number, can we trust it? And because here's what it adds up to. We don't know how many negative abductions are occurring, because we don't know how many abductions are occurring, period. And it may, in fact, be that all of us, and Dr. Carla Turner hypothesized this too, it may, in fact, be that all of us are experiencing these abductions. It's just the portions of us that are awakening to it and remembering it. Those are the people that are coming forward saying, listen, I was not supposed to remember this event, right? Think about this. And then when they do remember it, a lot of it, again, is filtered through a control mechanism, an umbrella of information where the phenomenon will present something to us and it's not real. And yet the body itself will tell the story. For instance, and this gets into something deeper. One of the experiencers that Dr. Kohler Turner was working with was a gentleman by the name of Ted Rice. I may have mentioned this earlier. If I did, you can edit it out. But Ted Rice was a psychic medium. He was working with people, helping them, assisting their lives. He's giving them guidances and insights and prophecies, all kinds of stuff. Well, one day, his body just begins to break down. Remember what I told you, the cognitive dissonance between what the mind remembers and what the body remembers. And so he gets in contact with a lady named Dr. Carla Turner. Dr. Carla Turner reaches out. They make a connection. She connects him to a lady named Barbara Bartholic. And Barbara Bartholic would do memory regression. Memory regression sessions is what I should say. That's what it is. And they finally get Ted into one of these sessions, and he agrees to be taken under. And it was during one of these sessions that finally, for a fleeting moment, Ted's mind makes eye contact with the trauma his body suffered. And there was just an eruption of memories that the phenomenon was not just obfuscating, but literally pushing down below the surface to where he had no access to them. But because of the panic attacks and nightmares that started to bleed into his world and affect his life, now he's like, I have to have something. I've got to go to a therapist or something. But anyways, Ted starts to tell his story. In his story alone, it transcends the microcosm of the current model of demonology. It's larger. Even ufology, like it's almost like, okay, this one case study has the ability to kind of overshadow all of the love and light narratives. And so in one of these sessions, Ted says, he goes, I remember being like an 8 or 9-year-old kid. He said, I was at my grandmother's house spending the night with her. And he said, and in the middle of the night, we hear a disembodied voice begin to talk to us. He said, and this is fascinating. This is literally what he remembered before the memory regression session. Okay. This is just his memory. This is fascinating. And so he's like, yes, he goes, I remember that entity speaking audibly to my grandmother and I. And he said, when it did, it filled the room with terror. He said, I was petrified. I didn't know what to do. He said, my grandmother woke up and started rebuking it and crying. She was pretty worked up too, crying and doing all that. And he said, the next morning, we go to lunch. He said my parents came back to pick me up. We all decided we're going to get into lunch, go to lunch rather. He said, so we get in my parents' car. He said, and that was the last time I spoke to my grandmother. We're like, what do you mean? And so in order to get access to what he was trying to remember at that point, that was to the extent of it. That was the extent. Then they go into memory regression. And then he's like, oh my God, I cannot believe what they did to us. Now, if you want to get the book, it's called The Masquerade of Angels. I have it somewhere up here. Anyways, it's by Dr. Carla Turner. Thank you to my buddy Nick Renaud, who purchased this and sent this to me. But here's Ted Rice. He said, when I was at that age, he said that night, he said, obviously, as you already know, the voice came to us. We heard it. And my grandmother said it was the devil. It will not return because I've rebuked it. Now, already we're dealing with the evangelical model of this phenomenon. Instantly, when she rebuked it in the name of Jesus, that is the evangelical model. That's what everyone, like when I was growing up at church, that's exactly what they were telling me to do. And so, anyways, so moving further. So, anyways, Ted is sitting there and he's starting to remember now. He goes, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." In Barbara and Dr. Clark Turner, like, what's going on, Ted? He said, right now, he said, it wasn't just an entity. It wasn't just speaking to us. It took us. It literally abducted him and his grandmother. And Ted's trying to work through these emotions as he's starting to remember this event. And they asked him, I said, okay, Ted, was this the entity that met you in your room? Like, are these the same intelligences? He said, yes, it is. But they only wanted me to remember what happened in that room. They didn't want me to remember what actually took place on the craft. Well, what were they doing? Now we're going to get into some of the nuances where it ties into witch air literature. They were force feeding this young boy and his grandmother aphrodisiacs. And in this scenario, he was prepubescent, and so had no effect. He's like, that's what he said. He's like, I just drank it. I didn't, it tasted nasty. He said, I didn't understand it. He said, but my grandmother got very excited. He said, and in this scenario, they start copulating with the grandmother, but she comes to her senses, trying to fight through the being drugged. And then she looks around and she says, I've only been intimate with one man in my life. That is my husband. He's been dead for years. Now, this is another situation where the phenomenon will measure the scenario and then kind of see how it can navigate around our instincts in our belief systems. It was at that precise moment when the phenomenon itself updated, and from the shadows emerges Ted Rice's grandfather. Moving right along.
What?
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
I'm
I don't
just
want to keep
curious.
rambling.
Why would?
Hmm?
No. Far from it, Nate. Why would they want to copulate with a grandmother? What? Like I
Right.
understand why they would want to copulate with a young woman in order to
Correct.
produce a seed, or so. Why would they want to do it with a grandmother?
This gets to probably the darkest. There's no question about it. The darkest nuance of the phenomenon. I've read serial killer books, watched serial killer documentaries and interviews. I'm fascinated by the mind, right, in terms of criminal psychology, that aspect of it. And so I've read some dark things trying to understand the whys and the hows and all of that. The last 10 pages of this book, I had to put down. I promise you, my friend, I read 2 pages of it, put it down, and called it a night. The next night I picked it back up, 2 pages of it, because what they were doing amounted to absolute torture. There was no point to it. There was no, okay, yeah, they're trying to self-replicate. No. It was literally to the point where if you were to, okay, and I won't get into the details because it's really, really dark and really bad, but if you were to put the BTK killer into this situation, it would fit hand in hand. I mean, talking about the most sadistic killers of our time, what they were doing. For instance, Ted was talking about how he said even before the copulation scenario took place, he said, "I'm looking," and he said, "I am out of my body, looking at my body." And he said, "I'm a kid." He said, "And I'm not understanding any of this." He said, "I just know that it shouldn't be happening. Like there's something really wrong with this situation." He said that's when one of the entities took his head off as he's watching, drained the blood from the body, and then looked at him. So, anyway, so what this is doing, though, it is challenging the evangelical worldview. Number one, these entities were rebuked in the name of Jesus. They were rebuked in the name of Jesus before the initial abduction took place. And I know this will be uncomfortable for people that follow my research and that want to embrace that evangelical model. And I'm not poo-pooing evangelical. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we have to look at what the data is. And in this particular case study, if it's not working for this one, it only takes one for that facade, that thin veneer of control that we all think we have over this intelligence to just shatter. And this is exactly what happened. So in this scenario, when they were done copulating with the grandmother, their attentions turned to Ted. Sorry, I'm not. I don't mean to be yelling, but it was at that point when the grandmother gets in between the two, and then she starts again. I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. Not just that, the Lord rebuke you. I mean, we're dealing with doctrine at this point, really are. In during this encounter, the entity starts laughing. The grandmother, you're going to go to hell for this, and I'm going to bind you and cast you back to hell. There is no hell. And so they go to get Ted, and Ted gets in the middle of them, or the grandmother gets in the middle of the entity and Ted. And when she does this, another entity walks up to her, looks at her right in the eyes, and said, "You will lose your life because of what you just did." And she's trying again to employ everything she was taught. In each, it's like Father Sinistro of Amino when he encountered that pagan demon on a dirt road. Here's some holy water. Here's some amulets. Here's the rosary. Does any of this work? And it didn't. And so Sinistrari considered that being to be a pagan demon. Take that into consideration. Here we all terrorized his grandmother. They said, "We are going to put something in your head. And you don't understand how beautiful you will be when you come back with us." Terrified them. They wake up the next morning going about their day. Again, that portion of their memory was blocked off by this intelligence. She gets in his parents' car. She immediately has a fatal stroke and dies. Fast forward, all of those events took place in Ted's life. It's just a phenomenon. Tried to lock it, throw away the key, and then Ted's going on, right? Okay, I'm going to help these people, help these people. Meanwhile, there's something in his body that remembers what took place, and that's what pushed him to reach out to Dr. Carla Turner. It's a very disturbing case study.
So going back to where he was watching the entity taking off his head and draining his blood, right? Obviously, there was no, obviously, when he woke up or came out from that state, there was no scar. This happened only in his head, right?
Very much so.
So,
Absolutely.
so, so when are the lines crossed? When are the lines crossed where somebody wakes up and they see an actual scar?
All the time.
When does it actually become? So why didn't he
All the
see a
time.
scar when his head was
I don't
taken
know.
off?
I don't know. This gets even interesting because this gets back into cattle mutilations where these things have been known to take the heart itself. And then when they go to do an autopsy or whatever the correct term is there, they look at it and they realize that there was everything was there. Everything. yeah, everything was there, in that there were actual like blood and blood samples they collected from the heart, to where they actually tested and said, yes, there was a heart here. It was a living being. This is, it's a cow. It was alive one day, and the next day the heart's gone. Everything else is there. We don't know. Now, it's what's unique about this though is, and this is a whole nother, how long we've been going, 30 minutes already, something like that,
I
20.
guess, yeah.
Oh my God. All right. So let's go
Oh
down
no,
this
yeah, you
avenue.
keep
All right,
doing what you're
cool.
doing. You're
Yeah.
doing, yeah, yeah, sure.
So here is another aspect of this, just this one case study that I would like to draw everyone's attention to. This entire time, like I said, Ted is from I don't know him personally, but from the way Dr. Clark Turner, great guy, awesome guy. And so, but what's so fascinating about this is what, in not just this case study, but other cases where people claim to have guides, right? Oh, I have a guide here, I have a guide there, and they're giving me all these instructions, and well, that's not my guide. My guide wouldn't do that, and kind of getting this weird symbiotic situation, symbiotic relationship with guides. And what we're realizing is that in a lot of cases, when the abduction starts to occur, the guides go eerily silent, my friend. Think about that. So they're present for the first 30 years, but boom, now they have nothing to say. And
When you say,
furthermore, yes, go ahead.
sorry, go on.
No.
Finish that. Furthermore,
Furthermore, what we're seeing taking place is another measure of perception control and management. The negative event takes place if these individuals, even through memory regression or not, doesn't matter, if they remember it at all, they'll go to one of their guides or someone else's guides, and that guide will begin to provide a good translation of what actually occurred to them. Think about that. Oh, it wasn't rape. It was, no, that's not, I mean, it seemed like it. You just misinterpreted it. In what I'm suggesting here, and this is exactly what happened with Ted Rice, complete silence on his guide's part. But when he did go to a friend of his who had guides, they begin to suggest, well, yeah, that's a good guy. That's a benevolent entity that was doing that to you. Can I suggest that this is akin to being assaulted by Dennis Rader? And that because of our ignorance that this is a proto-singular intelligence, we go from Dennis Rader to the BTK killer, asking the BTK killer what the Dennis Rader did to us? And that's what it seems to be, where again, the cognitive dissonance is present for a reason. What occurred to us was dark, but when we go to consult with the guides are then saying, hey, listen, that wasn't as bad as you suppose. It's even to the point now, my friend, we have researchers in the field, and I've witnessed this on social media with my own eyes, where the experiencer will say, listen, I emailed you my experience, right? I have scarifications on my bodies, bite marks, and photographic evidence, all that stuff. And yet, you're not answering my emails. And I just want to know why. And one of these researchers comments, well, you need to go channel Seth. And the danger, I'm afraid, again, is if we are dealing with the singular intelligence that has diversified its identity, then this is just another avenue of perception management. When, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll go back over here to the guide. Well, where's the guide coming from? It's coming from the source. And it's troubling.
so people who have angelic experiences and angelic encounters, do you think they are connected to the source? Is it all connected to this source that's seemingly negative?
Well, here's what I'll answer it this way. Right now, this intelligence is using a lot of propaganda. For instance, and I won't even mention the name, but okay, yes, I was out in the middle of my lawn and an orb showed up. Ball of light showed up. Everybody witnessed it. It was incredible. And it was documented by the Pentagon. And then from that orb emerged an entity. And that experience by that experiencer is then now used to redefine the nature of the phenomenon, right? In other words, well, this is a one of. Never happened before. It happened to me, though. And yet, what I'm afraid of is because of the way this intelligence has diversified its identity, and now because of its newest incarnation, which is the ETH, extraterrestrial hypothesis, that experiencer neglects to read the books. And instead of saying, okay, why is it emerging from a ball of light? Number one, and why does it sound eerily similar to Dr. Barry Taft's case in the San Pedro haunting with Jackie Hernandez? He didn't know it. They don't know it. If they would, right? If they had that understanding, they would say, okay, well, in that particular malevolent haunting, Jeff Wheatcraft was almost hung, literally in the attic when the entity had tried to take his life. In that same case, they cornered a ball of light, an orb, in a room. And from the ball of light, see the methodology? From the ball of light emerged, it went boom, 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 and then bam, there is an apparition, a being coming out of that orb. And when that took place, Dr. Barry Taft said half of his assistants in the room hit the ground. Boom, simultaneously. Now, and here's the problem. If we compartmentalize the phenomenon and say things like, well, you know what? Yeah, well, that's a separate entity. Okay, that's fine. But we can't afford to not look at it as a singular entity, if that makes sense. Here's why I say that, because the methodologies are the same. It's just when they interact with certain people, okay, yeah, I'm an alien, or yeah, I'm a ghost. And to answer your question, because I'm getting to a point here, there have been case studies where the individuals themselves believe in angels, they have a theological background, or they have some kind of religious context to their history, and they're taken by these entities and they start doing things to them, and they'll ask. And Dr. Turner had another case study like this: "Are you angels to us? Are you what are you angels?" And the answer was yes, but not the way you've been taught. But my point, guys,
So when you say their answer is not the way you've been taught,
right?
is
They
this
never went further.
are you suggesting so is this suggesting that they're under the guise of something malevolent, or are they coming as like what do they mean by that?
Well, that's a great question, my friend, because if these beings are supposed to be raising our consciousness, they're not giving us any context to their statements. Well, yeah, I'm an angel, but not the way you've been taught. Well, what was I taught? How would they know that? Number one. Number two, how are you different than what I've been taught? No answer. Right. And there is this control mechanism where if the phenomenon wants to make eye contact, it will. And when it does, it's almost as if, okay, is this really the entity? Or is that really my father? Ted Rice was at his family's house one night. The grandfather manifested to him. The same, he's been dead. And so the entity dons the disguise because, they're all love and light. They'll never deceive us. Sarcasm. And he dons yeah, okay, this is my grandfather. And then the grandfather tries to assault him. So again, these masks that they employ, I can't help but feel, based upon just these case studies, that there is a profound amount of deception at play, not just with the cognitive interface the phenomenon uses to interact with us, but even the memories that it kind of wants to just kill in us. Like literally, it happens to you, but I don't want you to know. These, throughout history, it doesn't matter what kind of species it is, if it was anybody else but the extraterrestrial doing this to us, we would consider it a threat.
Have you ever had memory regression? Have you ever
I haven't.
gone
I
through it?
haven't. I would like to do that one day, but it's like I was talking to a friend of mine. I don't know what would come out. You know
Would
what I
you
mean?
suggest everybody does it?
I would suggest that you do it if you are suffering from PTSD symptoms, or even if you are curious. Like if if you have missing time, absolutely. But even with Ted Rice, Dr. Turner was like, look, it's up to you. Problem is, you don't know what's going to come out in the open. But this control mechanism the phenomenon employs, I'm going to do things to you. I'm going to tell you it's everything you would ever expect, and then I'm raising your consciousness until 20 years from now, when your body starts to live the wear and tear of trauma that you're not even aware of yet. And so this has
What
happened
were some
over
of
and over and over again.
what
Very
are
good
some of
question.
those bodily what are the
Nightmares.
signs?
Usually it starts with nightmares. This gets back into demonology, right? When you're dealing with the demonic abductions of antiquity, our demonologists and our researchers, they came to the conclusion that the only reason we knew of these accounts is because people were coming forward with what they thought were nightmares, right? And they weren't. Same thing with Ted Rice. Oh, it's a bad dream. I can't believe I had that, but it feels real. It feels more authentic than just some dream. And so what did they do? They go into memory regression and realize that these are not nightmares, they're memories. And just like the incubi encounters, now again, what I'm trying to articulate here more than anything else is that I believe the evidence suggests it's a singular intelligence that has diversified its identity and evolved according to our awareness of it. But yeah, that's how they did it. It's just a dream. No, it's not just a nightmare or a dream. Those are memories. And so that's why in the 16th century, in witch era literature, literally they were being taken on what are called demonic flights. And then when these people, these abductees, were returned back to their home and they go on with their regular lives, then they have the nightmares of what actually took place. Why? Because this gets back into the dream-inducing sleep. Boom. And yet it's not a real sleep because it's almost like you're being drugged and you're forced to believe it's not real when in fact it is. And I'm trying my best not to pig trail because it's like when you pull on one strand, the entire phenomenon unravels.
Mhm. I had Dr. Silverman on the show, and he was an associate of the late Nigel Kerner.
Mhm.
Can you talk about some of Nigel Kerner's work and how it's related to some of your own research? And do you think it's relevant nowadays? And if so, why?
Yes, I love Nigel Connor's work. He was a master at what he was doing. And even as well loved as he was still underrated, in my opinion. Now, one of the key components that I've applied and that does apply to the field. Number one, we're dealing again with some form of biological robot, some soulless entity to which either consciousness or artificial intelligence has worn it as a mask to interact with the world. Number one, because that aligns even with the Nephilim hypothesis, the Genesis 6 theory, and the missing fetus syndrome. Number one. Number two, it was essentially that whatever these intelligences are, or this intelligence is, it has what I've considered to be the disability of being without being a being. And when it does interact with us, like one point, it says, okay, does a camera, it takes a picture, but does the camera actually understand? Or is that apparatus designed for someone else to take it and look at the data it's collected? And so I believe that's one thing. I think there's two things, but the main thing as well that we have to consider, regardless of our theological stance, regardless if we're secular ufologists, it doesn't matter. But the idea that the soul itself within the human being, it possesses some form of source or currency that this phenomenon craves. And it's fascinating research. But he obviously he includes some apocalyptic texts and apocryphal texts, or apocryphal rather texts in that. But he's driving the point further and saying, okay, listen, not only are these biological avatars of some sort, but who's behind them, right? What intelligence is behind what we're seeing, and what are they after? This ties into the Collins Elite research when they were interviewing a gentleman named Paul Garrett who had a near-death experience. And Paul Garrett, in this experience, he's out of body and he says, I'm looking up at the sky And he said, I'm seeing these UFOs that are hovering over people. And he said, and they would do something, and all of a sudden, a ball of light would ascend out of their bodies and into the UFO. And the UFO would go over to somebody else and farm them, a lot like the Matrix, right? And he said that whatever they were taking, he said it looked like it was the soul. And the people are talking, Paul, like, what do you mean? What do you, how can you describe that in a better way? Like, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, he said it was after they took the ball of light that these individuals just acted soulless. They were like zombies, essentially. So that's really what Nigel Kerner was suggesting, is that yes, whatever we're dealing with, it's not just using masks, it uses avatars as well. And I can go in that kind of vein too if you want me to, but I don't know how much time we have.
What do you think there's a physical? I sent you a thing the other day about that big pyramid-shaped rock in Antarctica. Do you think
Mhm.
there's actual what Buzz Aldrin, he seemingly took a picture of it in 2016 and immediately deleted the picture. Do you think there's actually a physical base,
Sorry.
I guess, for want of a better word, a physical base for these things here on the planet, or is it just purely
Mhm.
psychological?
I think it's a bit of both, actually. It's like what Bud Hopkins said at one time. He said, we know they're physical some of the time. Makes no sense, does it? But whatever we're dealing with, though, to inhabit our world, it does seem like they have to have a body, and that body has to employ technology. And then whenever they want to, they could just step out of that. This is why I call them the Malters, my friend. They can step out of it. And in whatever, okay, let's get back to this. In the Apocrypha of John, it said that they were creating bodies that looked like their apparitions. And so what this implies is that the hybridization program is a little bit different than what we would consider it to be. The true host is not the mother, the true host is the fetus itself. That is the host. And because we've been going off of an antiquated model of hybridism, we've always, oh, yeah, it's the mother, the hybrid mother. Nope, nope. That's the breeder to them. That's the way they perceive it. That's the they've even used that term, the breeder. The real host itself, that hosts the parasite, is the fetus itself. And when you look at the self-replication program, at least the Apocrypha of John, incubi literature, and now hybridization and ufology, the entity first was an apparition. And so you see the pathology of possession as it evolves throughout history. Sometimes it's in the Levant, and then it would focus its attention, okay, well, it's in Europe, and then all of a sudden it's in the America, all that. But what you see are entities that were not just replicating, but they wanted a body that mirrored their apparition. So this is why when you're looking, a lot of times looking at the gray, but what are we truly looking at? Like, what is the entity inside of it? What is the apparition that's appeared to multiple women, hundreds throughout the years? What is that entity? You know what I mean? I hope I'm making sense.
Sure, yes, you are.
Mhm.
Going back to Nigel Kerner, if I remember correctly, he said that these were biological robots and that they were coming from some faraway place that had died. They were made by beings that were more advanced than us, but died at some stage, thousands or millions of years ago. But these biological robots are still they're like automations. They're just
Mhm.
going on a program. They have no sense of
Correct.
themselves. They have no real, as you said earlier on, soul. So
Mhm.
they're just carrying out a program. Do you think there's much credence to that? Do you think he's got a point there?
Well, I mean, believe it or not, we are talking about theology in the sense that these are the arguments, the age-old arguments. Where is God? Right? Where is this superior intelligence? Did it create something and then die? And now this something has to keep replicating because that's the only thing we know to do or they know to do. I think it plays a bit of a role in it. Excuse me. But in doing that, we have to ask ourselves again, is this a program? Is it responding like a program? And that's where I align my beliefs with Nigel Kerner, because absolutely it abides and exists alongside of us like a program. For instance, if you look at the early abduction accounts, like in the 30s and 40s, Okay, what were we the most afraid of? Nuclear war, atomic bomb. Oh my God, oh my God. And so we had that kind of insecurity. And then when these beings were taking abductees, what were they saying? Hey, listen, we're afraid of the exact same thing you're afraid of. It mirrored itself. And what does that mean, Nathaniel? It means that our knowledge of the phenomenon only grows with our knowledge of ourselves. In other words, we can only know the phenomenon to the extent that we can know ourselves because it is a symbiotic relationship. This is why it evolves according to our awareness of it. In other words, like, okay, for instance, I had a lady I was talking to a while ago. I may have mentioned this to you, but if I did, I'll hopefully go a little bit deeper this time around. They began to take her when she was a kid, but her worldview was cartoons and comic books. And so when they appeared to her, they appeared to her as one of her favorite cartoon characters, right? Well, all of a sudden, as she's evolving, it did not evolve with her. And then when they manifested, they came in with the same DNA, the same program, if you will, as the same virus, not realizing that she had updated. And this experiencer told me that the entity, when it realized, oh my God, there's something wrong, it goes back to the source. What do you mean? What do you mean? Well, she's not believing in the mask I'm wearing. Well, why is she not believing in it? I don't know. What do we have to do? And she said that's when its eyes began to move back and forth and it began measuring her belief. What? It measures her belief. What are we witnessing here? We're witness again. This is where the hybridization program, all this, it merges with the program. The program realizes something, and just like a program, updates. Ted Rice, right? His grandmother. I've only been with one man. What do you mean? Hold on. What do you mean? Oh, I can, I won't do that again. But yeah, and it manifests again. Is this what you would prefer to believe in? And what I'm afraid of is because it's evolving according to our awareness of it, we can only know the phenomenon to the extent we know ourselves. That would mean that no matter how many steps forward we take, it's constantly reevaluating the model it's presenting, and then it introduces something else. Something else. This is why, this is why in times past, and somebody ripped this off of me the other day. I saw it on some podcast, the Dear Aunt Edna thing, right? This is why in times past, Dear Aunt Edna manifests. If what she's doing it does not matching the historical record of Dear Aunt Edna, we call it into question because we have history behind it, behavioral patterns, beliefs, right? All of these traits, characteristics. And then we would say, okay, that can't be Dear Aunt Edna, right? Ted Rice, his grandfather, manifests, says, okay, yeah, I'm the mask, I'm going to bypass your instinctual awareness and I'm going to appeal to your senses that you utilize the most to determine reality. Huh? And so many times we're blinded by what we see. And in this case, in times past, we had the ability to pull history back and compare it to the present. And if there was a misalignment between the mask it's wearing and who it wants to appear as, then we have the ability to test the spirit and say, this is not the real thing. And yet, just like a program, it self updates, it scans the worldview, and then it creates a new program, an amendment that's still 4 steps ahead, and then turns back around and confronts us with that new model. And here, in this case, in the 21st century, it's created a new character in the game. One we do not have the ability to vet outside of documenting the phenomenon that accompanies it. And what is that? It's the ETH, the extraterrestrial. Now, it doesn't have to validate. Now it's going to come in and say, listen, I'm going to perform a miracle. And if you can document the miracle I'm performing, then that miracle validates the validity of my message. And so, what this does, in a way, it forces us to trust in the phenomenon itself. This is why we have experiencers. Well, I saw a being come out of the orb and it gave me a message. Okay, how do you know the message was true? Well, there was a miracle. Okay. It has forced us by courting the human condition. It has forced us to face the reality that we can no longer vet them.
How far how far do you think they are? Like if you want to say
Mhm.
they have an agenda, how far do you think they are in their agenda? Is it working? Is it like
Well, it's akin to farming us. The model that I'm operating off of is the
so
parasitic
so
model.
there really is no goal on their part. Like
Well, yeah.
you mentioned earlier on, they crave us. Like, do they crave to understand us, or do they crave to manipulate us? Because if
Mhm.
they want, or do they, like if they like you said that they're looking for a soul, something that they don't have. Well, then,
Mm,
if that was the case, they would be craving to almost understand us. And in order to
right.
understand us, that would put them in a kind of like a weaker position, maybe, you know? So
Yes.
they can only go
The
so far with their manipulation.
I think it's inverted. Now, the soulless aspect of that was very much Kerner's work. I would suggest that what we're looking at the same thing. We're seeing the same thing, but we're calling it something different. What I'm looking at is a soulless body and a bodiless soul. This is why when you look at antiquity, there were no demons until you had death. Till a living person recorded, okay, this is what it is. Then they began to give us historical context to what that was. And yet, one of their theories prior to Catholicism hijacking demonology, their theory was that what we're dealing with were souls that wanted to be re embodied. And this is why I've introduced the hypothesis of the disability of being to be without being a being. And so, what we're witnessing with the hybridization program is the collective consciousness as it emerges and re-emerges back into a body. In the nature of it, such that where they want a body that matches the apparition itself, replicas of life, like the Apocryphon of John said. Now, this gets back into them making us in their image. Anyways, but yeah, it's a lot of deep stuff, man.
What else is going? So what else has piqued your interest in the last 3 months, let's say, last few months? What else has
Mhm.
piqued your interest in this field that you've come across
Yeah.
and you said, "Whoa, this is different."
Well, the current ETH model, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, it's almost like clouds without water. If we are to believe they're ETs because they told us they're ETs, then we have to believe they're all of the dead people they've manifested as throughout history. And we have to believe that they're demons because in the witch era literature, they manifested as demons. We have to believe, again, what I'm saying is what makes us believe that they're one thing and not any of the others, unless those others were merely traits, little screenshots of its evolution, right, throughout history. Yeah, and this is what's so important too, is that when people say they're not demons and stuff, they're what they're doing, and it doesn't really matter if their theology is Protestant, their demonology is Catholic. That's especially within ufology. Oh, well, demons don't have bodies. That's never been true. Never been true. Matter of fact, that was the whole purpose of an incubus encounter, was to create a body. And but my point is this, that it is possible, more than possible, that because we've compartmentalized the phenomenon, what we've done is taken one bloody footprint in history, even though it matches the blueprint of the other bloody footprint, because there's two and not one. Well, they're two entirely different phenomena, completely different, and they're not. It's just an intelligence that has eked its way through the blueprints of history, evolving alongside of us, and in some cases, literally leaning in, just like you take the mask and put your face in it, leaning in to the archetypes we've given it. And here's what's troubling too, is because it leans into certain archetypes, it made us think that the archetype, the mask, is the actual proto-intelligence itself. And so, in leaning into that, what that means is, okay, I'm a demon. Okay, well, but then you're going to do demon things. Okay, sure, that's what you want to think. Well, okay, well, then we'll throw holy water at you. Okay, that's fine. In all of again, what we're witnessing in real time is that these rules that were created, that we believe the phenomenon followed, they were not projected on the source intelligence. They were designed for the mask it was wearing. Draw a circle in salt and the demon will not leave. Well, yeah, if it's a demon. But what we're seeing in real time is, yeah, it'll wear the mask and follow those rules, but at any point it wants to, it can transcend that entire model. And then for a fleeting moment, like I said, you make eye contact with it and you realize, wait a minute, they're not following these rules. There's something behind it that is so intelligent that it has, like I said, it's diversified its identity, created a control system of propaganda to where sure, holy water will work until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, what are you looking at? You're looking at the real intelligence behind the mask coming over in adjusting certain things, and then stepping back and letting the program run. And that's what
What
we're
do you think
witnessing.
this what do you think this intelligence is?
Well, the antiquated dogmatic model of, well, if they were such a threat, they would kill us. That is, no, it's lazy. Just my perspective and my humble opinion. That's lazy thinking. Lazy thinking. Think of it more as, and I'm not saying you, obviously, my man. Other people would say that, but I'm speaking in general terms here. Think about the parasitic model. The parasitic model is an absolute threat to the host. It is because it hijacks that entity, using it. And in biblical antiquity, this was their definition of possession. They considered entities not just to be inside of the host, but on top of him. And so the most diabolical invasion is the invasion within. And so the goal of the host and the hybrid, if you will, is the parasitic model, where I keep the host alive, not because I love the host, it's because I love me. And as long as the host survives, I do too. And matter of fact, Ray Fowler touched on this. If you guys go back to his interview with Betty Luca, Ray Fowler, and Art Bell, he hints at this. And he suggests that we are the larva form of them. Yeah, we are the larva form of them. They are the butterfly form of us. And this again, we're dealing with models here, but this is why your earliest
But you
demonologists,
but
like
you
what I'm, Mhm. Good.
but what do you but okay, so I get that
Mhm.
we're the host. But
Mhm.
what I'm asking you is, and I get the different aspects of this intelligence that are manipulating us to a degree.
Mhm.
But I'm asking you, what do you think? What do you think this intelligence is? If
Mhm.
you were to pull away all the different masks, all the
Yes.
different scenarios, all the different events that have taken place with regard to this intelligence, let's just pull it all away. What do you think this
Right.
intelligence is?
I still have some questions I need answered before I really commit to a thought, but I would suggest if you're asking Nathaniel, okay, what can you prove 70% of and that I'm willing to commit to? Okay. I believe this intelligence 100% has falsified entire religious experiences, has propped up religious movements only to come back around and wear the mask of that religious leader, where you will not believe an alien until you believe in a man. And when that man comes back, the intelligence wears that mask. Okay, this is what I want you to do. This is what we're going to do. And so it's almost as if it creates fixed forms of imitation and predictable manifestations. I'm the Lady of Fatima. Are you? Yes. Why? Because you had to first believe in that in order for me to come back around and deceive. This gets back to their ability to mask. What are they masking? 99.9% of the time. It's someone that we have an understanding of. It's someone that we believe in and believe existed. And at first blush, it deceives us in the sense that, yes, do you first believe I am who I appear to be? Yes. Okay, do you believe that individual always had good intentions with you? Yes. They're not appearing to people in the image of Jeffrey Dahmer. They're appealing and appearing to the senses that we utilize first. And then, based upon the good intentions this mask has had in the past, you're going to trust me. And it's a way of self-deception. But whatever we're dealing with, it's to the point now where even when we do investigations, it will almost control the environment. And let me say it like this: the field of ufology, the even occult, the field of the occult, and even demonology, they all want us to believe that a primordial man extinguished his campfire, decided to repair himself to his personal quarters, took pen to paper or something, whatever, to papyri, whatever, and began to string letters together into words. And if those words are uttered phonetically correct, an intelligence beyond the ether would inhabit the vowels. And then in inhabiting the vowels, the incantation would produce the incarnation of the entity. I'm supposed to believe that we conjured them? No, I don't. I believe they conjured us. And the model of ufology is leaning on such, it's so secular to the point where, okay, yes, Jacques Vallée, well, yeah, well, they seeded us with technology. Okay, that's fine, but that's the modern incarnation. What if they seeded us with the incantation first? And we fed into the belief that we were the conjurers, not realizing we were the ones being conjured. And more than that, this gets back to the shortest horror story ever told. The last man on earth heard a knock at the door. Who is it? And so this is why I believe that if we really want to know disclosure, and I know I'm just shooting from the hip now, but I believe 100% disclosure happened in antiquity. And this is why people like Tim Taylor, he's out in the middle of the New Mexico desert. What is he doing? He's building altars. That changes the model.
Would you associate the word evil with this?
No, it's worse. Worse.
What's worse than
HP
evil?
HP Lovecraft, ignorance, ontological ignorance. To again, we can only know the phenomenon to the extent that we know ourselves. When we are ignorant of the phenomenon, it's because we are ignorant of ourselves. The phenomenon appeals firstly to the senses we utilize the most to form our reality, to form our beliefs, to obey or to disobey. Meanwhile, the phenomenon is targeting something we're completely ignorant of. And that's why when they take people out of their bodies, they put them back in, things happen to us. We don't understand. And they're not letting us into it either. You know what I mean? It's not, okay, this is how we're doing, this is what we're doing. No. And so this gets back to the idea, okay, what could be worse than evil? The idea that at least I matter. And H.P. Lovecraft came up with a philosophy called cosmicism. In this, to the degree of their understanding us and caring about us, the Collins elite and portions of our federal government have basically stressed to us. It's not that they're good or bad. It's simply that they don't care. Completely immune. It's like crushing an ant under your boot. You mean so little to me that it's not even an evil act to me. It's just like you don't really exist. And if you do, it's because you exist for whatever I want you to exist for. And it's arguably worse than evil, but it is a form of callousness where, and I think again, it is manifest in the sense that whatever I'm doing to you, when you go home to your family, Either you're going to remember whatever I want you to remember, or you're not going to remember anything at all.
Do you think there's something apart from this intelligence? Do you think there's something greater than this intelligence? Like, for is there
Mhm.
something that is higher than this?
I want to believe there is. I know Dr. Turner said there was, but and again, here's what people don't understand. People watch my shows and stuff, and they hear demonologist. They take kind of the blueprint of, take two of these, call me in the morning. Here's some holy water, and we're good. Yeah, and that's not really where I fit in. But if we're looking at the evangelical model, and if we are to believe that some of these case studies, I mean, Ted Rice is not a one-up again. There are many of them. If we're to believe that, okay, listen, we can throw religion at it, not only in times past has it navigated right around it, it's actually taken it and used that to conform itself, to update the program, and then it'll approach us once more. Oh, okay. So whatever we're dealing with, okay, let's go back in time. If we're to believe that these are not separate entities, two different intelligences, modernity and antiquity, then we have the intellectual obligation to look at this newest incarnation and say the following. Yes, the incarnation is modern, but the incantations are ancient. And it is through the incantation that the phenomenon is contacted, which would put us back into, again, the pages of Mesopotamia, ritual bowls, and the very first building of earthen altars. And what accompanied those? The spilling of blood, the death of consciousness. And if that's the model that we're going to look at, then it would be more alien than alien and more demonic than demonic. It would be something that the intelligence has literally either stopped us from articulating, or it's in one of the three levels of knowledge. It's the known, the unknown, and the unknowable. And right now, and again, when we're even if you look at the individual case studies of abduction, is what you experience the known, the unknown, or even your memories, are they a part of the unknowable itself? To where you understand what I'm saying? Like, you don't even have the ability to comprehend it. In thus far, what we've been able to do now, especially 21st century, in my colleagues that I'm lecturing with next month, take the mask off, look at the bloody footprints. What is that? And if we don't have words to articulate, okay, that's fine. But at least point at it and say that exists. That's the beginning of the new research. And I
Did you
probably
ever
took
read
over
the?
here.
Did you ever? No, no. That's fantastic. Did you ever read The Black Cloud by Fred Hoyle? You know that
No.
book, the novel. I read it years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's called The Black Cloud. It's by this scientist called Fred Hoyle. But it
Okay.
goes on about this gas that I think it's like this gassy cloud, and it's like immense, and it starts blocking out the sun. It comes
Mm-hmm.
to Earth, and it's basically going to wipe out life on Earth. And the cloud says that, anyways, to cut a long story short, one of the scientists that ends up studying this black cloud, they figure
Mm-hmm.
out how to talk to it in its own language. And the black cloud says, look, don't take it personally. I'm indifferent, just because there's a lot of human beings on the planet. I'm going to wipe
Mm-hmm.
them out anyways. And don't take it's completely indifferent to their feelings,
Yeah.
or to the way they think. But are you suggesting that this intelligence may be something from somewhere else in space, or are you telling me that it's something that completely ontological, where it's something that it's actually on a completely spiritual level?
I'm leaning more towards spiritual in, yeah, that it became incarnate. But again, this is transcending all of our models. This makes me believe and really commit that, look, You're not going to tell me a guy that can't read and write or doesn't even have any knowledge about the occult just decides to go string a ladder made of letters, calls out to the darkness, and as he's shivering in the cold abyss, something manifests? No. That's akin to giving a child the entire space program at NASA. And it works. He knows how to. No, it's again, it doesn't fit unless that what we're dealing with has masked itself not just in our belief system but in our memories and is so outside of us that we don't even know what the shape the next room is. I mean, if we're looking at this, the phenomenon can actually simulate near death experiences to the point where it knows what clothing the individual died in. How? This gets back into,
Mhm.
okay, what dimension do they exist in? And to my knowledge, and NIDS understands this, National Institute of Discovery Science, and I think that Whitley Strieber has touched on this. My hypothesis includes whatever these beings are existing in the afterlife. And because they're liminal, being in two places at once, present with but absent from, they use that knowledge and adding that into the program they're employing right now. That's why they know. Okay, who's dying? Well, how they're on the other side. And yet, we're still in this weird program where we can't trust everything we see.
You know, well, okay. So let me leave it at this last question. Where do you think this is going? Where do you think that, like nowadays, everybody is talking about, aliens. Everybody, you even have government whistleblowers. It's a lot
Mhm.
more prevalent nowadays than it
Yeah.
was even a year, 2 years, 5 years ago. Where do you think this is going?
Well, there's what we see on the outside, okay, we're going to get disclosure or we want disclosure. And I guess like I said, there's a difference between what we see from our federal government in what they want us to know versus what they really know in what they're really doing. The Collins elite researchers, they came out and said, look, we have found a direct correlation between magic that's negative and in soil samples taken from authentic crop circles. They found a cellular anomaly as well as an energy signature that was both present in the crop circle itself and in negative dark magic. They found it. I'm not saying that, okay, these beings were trying to curse the soil. No. Duh. People have said that. Oh, well, you're trying to say they're trying to kill soil? No. What I'm saying is exactly what they're saying, that the source intelligence was behind both manifestations. Now, that's our government knew that in the 80s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. They had that research done. So right now, if you want to look at what's going on, look at Tim Taylor in New Mexico, right? Building altars. He's not behind a computer. He is a scientist, mind you, but he knows that the phenomenon itself, no
I never
matter
heard of
what,
this guy. I never heard of this.
yeah, I'll send you the link. I'll send you the
Sorry,
link to one of
sorry.
his lectures.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he he's
And
he's he's building altars.
yes, absolutely. Mind you, that is eerily similar. Not even similar, it's the same. Albert Bender, one of the earliest ufologists, building altars in his attic. George Hunt Williamson, another early ufologist, creating homemade Ouija boards and contacting extraterrestrials. Huh? The model doesn't fit. And this is what I'm saying again. Yes, the incarnation may be modern, but the incantations they're responding to are ancient. And if they seeded us with technology in the 21st century, what makes us say they didn't seed us with incantations and ritual magic in antiquity? Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, whatever we're dealing with is so
Last
far beyond, my friend. So far.
last question I'm going to ask you before we leave it, Nate. So, is there any protection? Do you think there's any protection? I know I had Steve
Yeah,
Mira on before, and he was telling me about iron, the
yeah.
protective qualities of iron himself, and your other colleague Barry Fitzgerald. Do you think there's any protection?
Yes, iron is something I would recommend. If you have any religious amulets, make them of iron. There is a measure of belief to this, but there are also metallic objects or some kind of metallic component that does push the beasts back in the darkness. But I guess I'll end it with this too. We only know the phenomenon to the extent that we know ourselves. And I think that is one of the largest masks, the most effective mask the phenomenon has placed has not been on itself, it's been on us.
So to know ourselves, to know oneself, what is that? What does that look like?
Spirituality, to go inward, to go inward. And yes, it's that would be what I would do. The people that I grew up with that were very effective with these beings, and it didn't matter what mask it was. They were secluded, they were deeply spiritual, they were centered, and they had a sense of discernment. And in the occult field, okay, yeah, they're initiates. They're initiates. Okay, fine. But I think that our government knows that, and not 10 minutes from me now at the Wright Pat Air Force Base, they were performing rituals and experiencing temporary manifestations of metamaterials. The phenomenon would give them this. I'll be quiet, but yeah, it's all fascinating.
Nate, where can people find you? Where can people find you and your stuff?
So I have my YouTube channel for those who want a cursory knowledge of my research, and on my YouTube channel, I have a playlist. After this show, once it gets published, I'll add it to my that playlist. It's all of my guest appearances. So I think it's up to like 114 now. You can go through all of those, but I also have an Instagram page, and that's where it's the only social media I have outside of YouTube, if that could be considered social media. But I'll be lecturing in the UK this February, and I'll be going even deeper, possibly than I went tonight.
Nate, it's been great. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to speaking again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.